Welcome back, everyone. Our next presenter is Acurx Pharmaceuticals, Inc. It trades on the NASDAQ under the symbol ACXP and is a clinical stage biopharmaceutical company focused on developing new antibiotics for difficult to treat infections. Please welcome its president and CEO, David Luci. Welcome, David.
Thank you, Anna. It's great to be here, and thank you all for listening into the presentation today.
All right, we look forward to it.
Okay, with no further ado, we started Acurx Pharmaceuticals in mid-2017. We have, if approved, what would be the first new class of antibiotics in over 30 years. And that's important because of the new pandemic of antimicrobial resistance, pursuant to which bacteria finds a way to avoid being killed by existing antibiotics because there have been no new antibiotics, only derivatives of pre-existing antibiotics. So the FDA and the CDC and WHO have put out a call to arms, which the private sector has now answered in ways that we'll talk about. And we're at the height of that wave with a new class of antibiotics, one of the few companies with a new class of antibiotics in clinical development. The mechanism of action is novel. That's what makes it a new class. We're targeting the DNA polymerase 3C enzyme, which is the primary catalyst or construction worker within the cells that creates DNA for new gram-positive bacterial cells, including C. difficile, MRSA, VRE, and PRSP. So the biggest incidence of bacterial infections known to man. The CDC and the World Health Organization have a priority pathogens list. CDI, C. difficile infection, the target of our lead antibiotic candidate, ibezapolstat, targets the treatment of C. difficile infection, which is an urgent threat on the priority pathogens list. And MRSA, VRE, and PRSP are also included on the priority pathogen list as serious threats. And that's important because it gets you nice little goodies from the government organizations like Qualified Infectious Disease Product status and FDA Fast Track status, both of which we've received on our lead program, ibezapolstat. So we also have phase 2A success with ibezapolstat. It's not just safe and tolerable like you see in phase 1s. We have 100% cures in phase 2A, 10 patients, 10 of 10, cures at the end of treatment, and also 100% sustained clinical cures 28 days after or 30 days after end of treatment. And that's important because that data is not even close. There's no antibiotic to treat C. difficile infection, which even approaches our numbers. So our company mission is to get this new class of antibiotics, Pol-3C inhibitors, to market, starting with ibezapolstat to treat C. difficile infection, and then moving on to our second product in the pipeline, ACX375, which targets the treatment of MRSA and other serious threat pathogens. MRSA being 52% of all hospital-based infections in the U.S. today. So we've got an amazing amount of coverage already, which you can find on our website, acurxpharmaceuticals.com, on shedding new light on the use of Pol-3C inhibitors to treat C. difficile infection and MRSA and other gram-positive bacterial infections. So when I say our data is lights out, it literally is 100% cure, 100% sustained cure, albeit in small numbers of patients, but with a scientific rationale for why those numbers are so strong, which I'll explain. You can see on this chart, vancomycin is the standard of care antibiotic to treat C. difficile infection. And although it's got a relatively high initial cure rate, about a quarter of the patients that are cured have a relapse or a recurrence of infection. And that's a big problem. The average is 20 to 40% recurrence with vancomycin treatment. Fidaxomicin is a Merck product. It is hugely expensive, close to $4,500 for a full course of treatment. And you can see it's not even as efficacious as our drug. Ridinilazole has had bad data. That's Summit Therapeutics product. I wouldn't say bad data, but certainly not lights out, even compared to vancomycin. Although ridinilazole is in phase 3 and could be approved, in our market opportunity, we consider conservatively as if ridinilazole would be approved along with our product. So the reason why I say that there's scientific underpinnings to support our data in the view of our scientific advisors is because there is a 10-day treatment period for vancomycin, ridinilazole, also ibezapolstat, our drug. They're all 10-day treatment periods. We're seeing 100% cure after 10 days, and our science guys suggest the reason for that is because we're getting over 100 times the concentration of medicine into the colon, which is the site of the infection, by antibiotic therapy. So that constitutes a reason why we're seeing such high cure rates, because there is so much concentration of drug, 100 times more than is needed to kill the C. diff bacteria. And then you say, well, gee, why are none of these patients recurring? And the reason is because most recurrences are tied to decimating or significantly impairing the microbiome. That's the good bacteria in the gut. Most antibiotics hurt it. And when you hurt the microbiome, it's easier for bad bacteria to get through the gut without being killed. And that's the problem with the standard of care, vancomycin. That's why vancomycin is such a vulnerable frontline therapy. And that's why we're showing 100% sustained cure. As you know from our press release, if you follow from a couple of weeks ago, we recently filed a patent on the use of ibezapolstat to restore the microbiome. We're seeing actual data to show we have a dual impact, where we're killing the acute infection, the C. diff bacteria, while at the same time, by the end of day 3 of 10 days of treatment, we're completely restoring the microbiome. So what do people use right now to treat C. difficile? In mild and moderate cases, it's still antibiotics all the way. And you can file the Infectious Disease Society of America treatment guidelines. There are antibodies like Series Therapeutics program, but they have to be used in combination with a dealer's choice antibiotic, meaning take your pick. If we're 100% cure rate, they'd probably pick us. But the problem with that program is if we're 100% sustained cures, the claim to fame for Series program is that they show a 31% reduction in recurrences of infection by day 30 after treatment. But if there are no recurrences of infection because of the presence of ibezapolstat on the market, then Series program, Nestle's program, which backs Series, would seem to not have much more of a place in the treatment regimen. Fecal transplant is used in the most severe cases of C. difficile, but they do have FDA warnings on their label. They have been known to be deadly as a treatment. And vaccines, there's no data to show that they work. And they would take very, very large studies in order for them to be approved. So the name of the game for C. difficile is still antibiotic therapy. So in our pipeline, we have only polymerase 3C inhibitors, starting with ibezapolstat. We're phase 2B ready. And in the fall, we'll start enrolling patients in our phase 2B trial, and we'll finish enrollment in the second quarter of next year. The second program is at lead optimization, and that's the one that targets not C. difficile, but that's the one that targets MRSA, vancomycin-resistant enterococcus, and other high-incidence gram-positive resistant bacterial infections. So the mechanism of action is to target and kill the gram-positive bacterial cell by blocking or clogging the Pol3C receptor, which is inside of the gram-positive bacterial cell. So we're able to stop the receptor from making DNA, gram-positive bacteria DNA, and kill the host cell at the same time. The market is extremely large for C. difficile. By the time we get to market, 1.7 billion. And if our data holds up as with the 2A trial, given the scientific underpinnings, we believe we would be frontline therapy. Assuming Summit Therapeutics, with their 700 million market cap today, which is in phase 3, assuming they get approved, we would still be looking at $500 million of peak year sales at a heavily discounted price of $3,000 for a full course of treatment. When I say heavily discounted, I think if we're showing that we're restoring the microbiome while having a better kill rate for the C. difficile bacteria, I think we have a very strong case for being, $5,000-$6,000 for a full course of treatment, given that fidaxomicin is $4,500 for a full course, and they don't restore the microbiome, they hurt it. So our phase 2A success, we dose patients twice a day, 450 milligrams. It was designed to be up to 20 patients. Because of the success we had with absolutely no blemishes, our scientific advisory board recommended we early terminate at 10 patients and move on to phase 2B. We took that advice, and we did. On an IP and regulatory front, we have 10 years of regulatory exclusivity for ibezapolstat from the time we get a FDA approval, marketing approval. And that's 5 years for a qualified infectious disease product status under FDA GAIN Act rules, and 5 years for new chemical entity status. And in the view of our scientific advisors, to put it in a nutshell here at the bottom, they say that the phase 2 efficacy results provide clinical validation for targeting Pol3C to kill resistant gram-positive bacteria, including C. difficile, MRSA, VRE, and PRSP. So this data from our phase 1 trial shows that we are actually, when it says antibiotic activity, we're not killing actinobacteria. Other antibiotics, including vancomycin, do. And that's one of the good bacteria in your healthy microbiome. Now, we don't kill Firmicutes either, even though it says yes here under antibiotic activity. The reason we say yes is because C. difficile, technically, is a Firmicute. And that's the only one that we're able to kill. We are unable to kill other Firmicutes other than C. difficile. So ibezapolstat, part of its success is that it's very narrowly targeted to C. difficile. So we also, for the first time, as we understand it, in phase 1, not beyond, but in an early stage study, phase 1, we did a head-to-head comparison of our ibezapolstat against standard of care vancomycin to show the difference in what we do to the healthy microbiome. And we were able to show a 2 to 3 log reduction in the healthy bacteria in the gut with the vancomycin treatments, and no appreciable reduction of the healthy bacteria in the gut of the healthy volunteers that took the ibezapolstat. Also worthy of note, ibezapolstat is poorly soluble in the gut, meaning it's kind of like an internal Band-Aid. You take it orally, but less than 10% of it absorbs, and it gets right into free concentration, gets right into the colon where you want it. We think that supports scientifically the low recolonization rate for the C. difficile after the end of treatment. So with 2A now completed, we move on to phase 2B. It's just 64 patients, 32 patients, one-to-one randomized, double-blind, of our ibezapolstat head-to-head against vancomycin standard of care. With that data, after successful phase 2 data, Summit Therapeutics had a 225 million NASDAQ market cap. So, and you see what the Summit Therapeutics data looked like to support that. That they had relatively good phase 2 data, 67% sustained cure. So what would our market cap be if we maintain the 100 and the 100 after phase 2, or even if we have 90 and 90? They had 225 after phase 2. Results were reported with this data here. So what do we need to get in phase 2B for a success? Based on the bountiful amount of vancomycin clinical data that's been reported, we can guesstimate what vancomycin will do in the phase 2B trial. So if vancomycin does 26 out of 32 patients, in order to establish non-inferiority, we would have to just get 24 out of 32 patients to establish non-inferiority and technically have a successful phase 2 and move on to phase 3. Now, we don't think that we're going to slip from 100% down to 75%, but this just to show you how much room we have to maneuver. ACX 375 is preclinical, so I won't dwell on it too much, other than to say it's its own new chemical entity. It's got IP, strong IP, out to December 2039, and it targets the treatment of MRSA, which by itself is 52% of the incidence of hospital-based infections in the U.S. So ultimately, if and to the extent ibezapolstat and 375 are both at market together, 375 will be, probably twice the market potential. So there are external positive value drivers. As is customary in my experience, the private sector has taken the lead with kind of incentives ahead of the government agencies, but the government agencies have had a call to arms as well. The private sector now has the AMR Action Fund, which is scheduled to start very soon funding sponsors of new classes of antibiotics that treat priority pathogens, of which we have 2. And the Repair Impact Fund started in 2018. It's done 2 full cycles now, had about 200 applicants, I believe, thus far. And they, too, are granting up to about $15 million to sponsors of new classes of antibiotics that treat priority pathogens. And in fact, we started the application process with Novo Nordisk's Repair Impact Fund in early May, and we are delighted to report that we got into the second round and final round of consideration. We will know by the end of the year if we're going to get funded for our $13.5 million, which we applied for. Those are private sector opportunities. The public sector includes the PASTEUR Act, which is basically the federal government stockpiling your drug at hospitals around the country, paying you the fair market value of the quantity that they think they'll use in the public hospitals for the entire year up front. And they also pay for phase 3. And then there's also the Disarm Act, which would pull a QIDP, qualified infectious disease product like ours, out of the Medicare reimbursement structure so that hospitals don't lose profit by using a generic vancomycin frontline instead of using our drug frontline and avoiding the downstream medical costs associated with the 20 to 40% of the vanco patients that have a recurrence of infection. So our company is run by myself. I come at things from a corporate legal accounting background. I was the lead executive that sold BioNvision to Genzyme back in 2007. That was a $345 million deal, and we had a childhood leukemia drug that we got approved in Europe. My partner, more importantly, started his career at Pfizer, where he maintained strong contacts, and he got to the level of president of Sanofi US before going into biotech, where I met him when I became CFO of Macrochem after we sold BioEnvision, and Bob was the CEO, and we've been together ever since. The management team includes Shang Yu and Larry Morton from Acurx Pharmaceuticals. They were two of the key R&D folks that took Acurx Pharma and Cubicin, their lead product. They took it to market, and it became a billion-dollar blockbuster product, treating the same infections we're targeting with ACX 375. So having completed our IPO and filed for the Repair Impact Fund, we have a couple of business development activities we're continuing to work on in the second half of this year. We will announce that the start of enrollment for the all-important Phase 2b trial. And going into 2022, we also hope to complete the lead optimization and file for Fast Track designation for ACX 375, our second drug. And that's Acurx. Could I open up the floor to questions?
Thank you so much, David. Yes, we do have some questions for you. Let's jump right in. So this question is from Lauren Chavers. So what are the value inflection points going forward?
So in my view, the largest value inflection points going forward are going to be if we can announce the big pharma partnership with Novo Nordisk's Repair Impact Fund, because the cash value of that, let alone the validation, would be $1.35 a share with 10 million shares outstanding. And also the results of the Phase 2b trial. I think you can't underscore the importance of that. And that's also near in. That will occur in the second, we'll complete the enrollment in the second quarter of next year. So that's, 9 months out. Those are the biggest things. There'll also be additional scientific information we'll be able to present at scientific meetings in the fall. We'll participate in 3 to 5 of those. And we're already targeting certain poster presentations as we continue to evolve with our understanding of the microbiome impact that ibezapolstat has based on the data we've generated from the 2A trial. We'd like to get that data out there because there really hasn't been any drug in C. difficile at all that shows that it's restoring the microbiome while it's killing the bacteria. So if we can kill the bacteria better than any of the others and restore the microbiome just 3 days into a 10-day treatment regimen, we think that two-dimensional approach is a dimension and an extra dimension that the others don't even approach. So the more of that information we can get out there, I think that'll go over really well.
Thank you, David. From Chuck Montville, can you talk about recruitment expectations for the upcoming clinical trial? And how soon could you start dosing?
Our goal is to start dosing October 1. And the 7 trial centers that are already up and running from the 2A study suggest they could do about 47 patients in a 90-day period. So if you extrapolate that out, we need 64 patients altogether. And we have 13 additional, beyond the 7, we have 13 additional trial centers that we're onboarding now so that we can monitor the enrollment process. And if the enrollment is slow for any reason, we can increase the number of sites very easily.
From Danny Petit, do you have any potential partnerships on the horizon?
Yes, Novo Nordisk is the one that I've already suggested, and there are other big pharma potential partners that are actively considering this right now.
From Lon Calabresi, are there any scientific journal papers coming out or any medical conferences scheduled for this year?
Yes, and by the way, the way you said Calabresi, I now know that you probably speak Italian, but there are at least 3 and maybe 5 conferences that our scientific team will be doing later this year. There's the AMR conference, there's the C. diff conference, and I forget the third. There's also an antimicrobial working group conference And we recently joined, I don't know if you saw in our headlines, the Antimicrobial Working Group. And the purpose of that is to try to impact the legislation, the Disarm Act and the Pasteur Act, to try to get them approved. I understand we're the only pharma company in New York City that's working on antibiotics, new classes of antibiotics, or really any antibiotic to treat C. difficile. So we're hoping to be able to, get a couple of sit-downs with the local politicians.
Fantastic. From Emmett Nielsen, the stock is off a third from its IPO price. What do you attribute this to?
Well, there are a number of things. One, I heard, this is secondhand, so I don't have any direct knowledge, but I heard there was a big block of stock that moved a few days ago into yesterday, and I think that movement is now over. I attribute it also to the world economy, the world political stuff that's happening, which I think has unsettled a lot of stocks recently in our space. And really, that's about it. What I would say is that our fundamentals continue to get stronger and stronger. So if you go back to our IPO, where we IPO'd at 6, we didn't have in our IPO documents the notion that we had gotten into the second and final tier of consideration by the Novo Nordisk Repair Impact Fund. So, it's not like 90% of those who apply get into the second round. They don't. It's probably just the opposite of that. So, these are by themselves value inflection points. The fundamentals continue to get better. We do have a retail base, so I do expect volatility. But if you play the long game, when we announce the phase 2B data, and possibly with a partnership or two along the way, the ship should correct itself.
Tim Lane wants to know how long it will take to get FDA Fast Track approval.
FDA Fast Track, we're a Fast Track designated product, which has advantages, but it's not a Fast Track approval process. We'd have to do a phase 3. We don't know what the phase 3 will look like. In large part, it may depend on what our phase 2 data looks like. But we're going to have a sit down with the FDA after phase 2. If hypothetically we're looking at 100% cure, 100% sustained cure, and by the way, we're one of the unique antibiotics that actually restores the microbiome along the way, then it may be possible for us to get some flexibility from the FDA, because it would be a new dynamic, not just a new drug, but a new dynamic for how to treat C. difficile infection.
Vincent Rosen wants to know how much cash you're holding per share.
Cash we're holding per share is about $1.70.
From Joyce Robinette, are you currently capitalized to get you to the next milestone, or will you need to raise additional capital?
No, we have plenty of money right now to get well through the phase 2B trial. We have money that gets us at the very least to the middle of 2023 if we needed to stretch it. So the 2B trial should only cost us $4 million, and we have 17 million plus. Even if we go all the way up to 20 trial centers and incur additional costs that, we don't currently have in mind, but if the enrollment's off, we can do it. I mean, having that much money that we don't need just increases your flexibility to do things to enroll more quickly.
And the last question is from Danielle Dries. Could your technology be adopted by a major? And do you have any joint ventures with any majors in the space currently?
A major, meaning like a big pharma company?
Yep.
Oh, yeah. Big pharma companies are looking at us now. They can't steal it. We have patent coverage, including composition of matter, formulation, method of using it to treat the microbiome, to treat C. difficile. But yeah, it could easily be adopted by a major. And bear in mind, back in the day, in the 90s, Bayer, AG, and Merck both had preclinical programs with antibiotic candidates targeting the treatment of bacterial infections. They were polymerase 3C, just like ours. They had toxicity issues back then that they couldn't get around, so they never got into the clinic. We got around the toxicity issues with ibezapolstat, largely because it's like an internal Band-Aid. There's almost no absorption internally, and we're using it for an external infection, i.e. the colon, outside, beyond the GI tract. So Big Pharma is well aware that the Pol3C enzyme is a viable target that could be exploited for treatment of these kind of infections.
David, do you have any closing remarks?
I'd just like to thank you and to thank everyone for listening today, and we look forward to updating you soon.
This is a fantastic presentation, very important technology. Thank you so much for joining us on our conference, and we look forward to your future updates.
Okay, thank you.
All right, everyone, please stay with us as we have a very short but very important update from a regular Emerging Growth Conference presenter, PBIO, that's coming up next. Stay with us. We'll be right back.